That has also nothing to do with the system. Yo. 2 days. Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry we're a little bit late, but we're kicking it off now. This afternoon we're going to be discussing questions and issues around Chapter 4. We've got a decent attendance of people. See over there. So I'm just going to leave it looking that side over there. Okay. Just to repeat, Ranil is unfortunately still ill, so he's not going to be joining us this afternoon. So what we'll do is we'll double up next week, and he'll cover chapters 4 and 5 for us next week. And this afternoon, we will continue with questions and issues around chapter 4. Okay. So that's really going to be the main focus thing. So hopefully you've had some more time to spend with chapter 4 and have come up with some additional questions since the ones we discussed over the weekend. So maybe we should do a quick catch-up, see where everybody's at, how you're feeling after the weekend session, and where you're at, and then we can hit the questions. Volunteers?
I read the whole book, right? And I'm supposed to do section questions, but I was bored. So I read the book. So I'm gone back to section 2 again, chapter 2. So I started questions off there again, and I'm doing those questions. So I know I'm going back behind, but that's what I'm doing. It's like a go over and come back again to refresh your memory style. I feel that's working better for me as opposed to. I'm not saying anything what we're doing here is wrong. I'm just saying that's working better for me. But I'm here.
That's cool. As long as you bring your questions, that's good.
Yeah. So when we do like that catch-up session, then I'll bring those same questions that I'm having lots of problems back again. When we do catch-up revision of chapter 2 and the 3 difficult ones.
You can even bring them to the weekly sessions. I think what we're finding is that a lot of the questions aren't tied to a particular chapter, and that when you try and answer a question, doesn't matter which chapter it comes from, it has elements in it which come from different chapters. Sometimes in the correct answer, sometimes in eliminating the incorrect answers, we need the information from the different chapters. And now that we're on chapter 4, there's only one chapter left really that we haven't covered. So it really doesn't matter which chapter the stuff is coming from. We need to be getting to that point where we understand it all and are able to integrate the thinking around all of that.
To be honest, Saturday was a good session. I haven't really progressed since then. I haven't done any questions. Sunday I was busy, and then Monday just flew by. So I haven't done questions. I would normally have sent it through to Justin already, but yeah, I haven't done any questions in chapter 4. So I'm a bit behind.
Myself, in terms of reading the content, lagging a bit behind. A lot to cover. But I find the questions really help, so trying to get through as much questions as I can. So that's been pretty helpful so far. The weekend session was quite informative. Even our weekly question sessions I find very good in terms of understanding.
Okay, with me, I went through half of the questions for chapter 4. So I
Well
have
done.
just a little half on my old 2010 stuff.
Okay, great.
So when I came here, I did a few questions and asked how waiting for people to come.
Any opportunity works. It doesn't matter when you do it.
Because next week I'm not going to be around on Tuesday and things because I'm writing on Wednesday. I'm writing on Monday and Wednesday. So I got other exams besides this. So next week I'm not going to be here, but I'll be here the following weekend for the questions. So hopefully I can cover stuff.
Okay, great.
Unfortunately, I missed the Saturday session.
But he was here, but not here.
I'll try and catch up maybe for the Saturday with that. I did questions. I've not been able to finish the whole chapter 4 in terms of reading, but I found that particular side if you do the questions going into the book, that's helping. Just in this chapter in terms of the RTOs and RPOs, it's kind of, you know, how they ask about low and high. It's kind of tricking me there, and hopefully about the yeah, when we're going through it, can ask me to maybe unpack just that part, because I see they like asking me questions, but sometimes even though now I can understand what it means in relation to, you know, the law.
Ask all the colleagues here as well, because you know what catches you will catch them, and then we unpack it and go through it, and maybe talk some practical examples of some of those things, and then we can see how it goes from there. Cool. Okay. We must leave contact details so that we can avoid repeats.
I thought maybe I missed the memo.
Sadly, our security guard is not the most awake, so you needed to hoot him when he would let you in.
I haven't had it much. I left my book with you Saturday.
Oh dear.
It's your fault.
Have you got it back?
I only found it now, yeah.
Okay, so you do have it back at least.
Yes.
Sorry.
With me, I failed to tackle the questions if I haven't covered the content, because I ended up more spotting kind of which one is the right answer without understanding why it's right, where it's coming from. So for me, doing questions before the content, it doesn't work for me. I go through the content and then I tackle the questions. So I've been very slow. So I ended up doing questions of the previous chapters.
Okay, that's fine. Any of those questions, then we can talk through those as well. Okay, cool. So let's start with some of those questions. Okay. So you good?
I sent it to you.
Is that sent it now or sent it previously?
No.
No. Okay, cool.
I also have a request. Can we try to break down the OSI model thing in a simpler English maybe? I've tried to compare like different notes in terms of understanding what goes where, but I think I'm still...
Can we maybe park that and say, let's come back to that. Let me go and Google some stuff. Let me see if I can find something that explains it in a simpler way. I vaguely remember there was a video from like years ago that Nokia or somebody put together, and it kind of was a cartoon animated video that kind of explained it.
Not by John Lee.
I don't think so. I'm not sure. But I want to try and see if I can find it, because that might, even if it doesn't completely explain it, act as a little bit of an info, and then we can
When you start
from there.
putting protocols on each layer, which protocol goes to which layer, and
it can become confusing. And then there was some article yesterday I was reading about some bunch of researchers are trying to come up with a new protocol that replaces TCP/IP
no.
that
So it is not
works
an
based on
vector
named
language.
information in a kind of a more BitTorrent style method of communication. That won't affect you now, but you know, in 10 years' time, this will be the thing that we have to learn, and all firewalls and everything will have to be redone based on these new security methods and routing methods.
And I realize some of the questions they based on your understanding of that model.
It is. You do
It
need
is
to
as
understand
much as
those
they
things.
don't ask directly, like what happens on the physical layer, what happens on the data link, but without you having that background of really understanding, you ended up just understanding the answer as opposed to where it's coming from.
Okay, that's fine. So we'll try and find a spot to fit that in, and I'll do some homework around that.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to load up my mail quickly and get Ishmael's questions here.
something else, you'll see. Like maybe you would want to do CRE, internal audit, something to make them, but I'm sure that's
Ifan is online and saying hello to everyone.
Hey. Hi.
Carmen was wanting a link. I'm trying to find where the link is so that I can send it to Carmen. I'm not seeming to find that so easily. I'm not sure. There's links over there. So there's the link there for Carmen.
Oh. I know after that 10 days of you, she'll be coming to playing in Christian.
Good, so Carmen's online as well. Hi, Carmen. Okay, so here's Ishmael's questions for chapter 3 and 4 that I'm just bringing up on screen now. Okay. Let's just zoom these in a bit.
Oh, yeah. He copied it into a Word document.
Okay, so we've got the questions up. I'm just going to share them across and they'll be ready in a second. So let's go to screen 2. Share that. Oh, okay. That seems to be...
Disaster recovery.
Let's just see. Okay, cool. So there we now have those. Okay, let's put reference one just over this side over there. Okay, cool. So we have our first question here. Let's have a look at this and see what this is all about.
Bonnie has a question. No, I haven't. Oh, speak to him now before we then we can have the questions. No, but maybe they okay, but maybe they don't.
Raise it. Let's start talking, and then because we've got people online joining us as well. So this is a question from chapter 3.
No, it's not a question. She just wants to ask.
It is part of chapter 4 as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
The difference between RPO and RTO, recovery point.
Recovery point objective and recovery
Yes.
time objective. Okay, so those are pretty important when it comes to disaster recovery and business continuity planning and planning for how you're going to deal with certain things. Okay? And those two measures really relate to two slightly different things. One is looking at how long can you afford to be down? So how long before the system must be back up and running again? Okay, that's your recovery time objective. Okay. The other one is how much data can you afford to lose? Okay, that's the recovery point objective. So if you think of something like a bank, which is running transactions through, every transaction has got rand value money associated with it. So from a recovery point objective, you don't want to lose any money at all. Okay, so your RPO would be 0. You must not lose a single transaction. But from a recovery time objective, as much as you don't want to annoy your customers, maybe 5 minutes would be acceptable, or 10 minutes, or half an hour. They will have done some calculations as to how long before they really annoy the customers to such a level that they're actually going to lose customers to an alternate bank. Okay, so that would then give you a recovery time objective. But that's different for different organizations. If we're in an organization where we get information submitted to us on a manual form, and we then capture it back into the system. And there, the recovery point objective might not be so bad, because we say, well, you know what, if we have to go and capture the previous day's pieces of paper, it's not the end of the world. We can do that if we have to. The recovery point objective might be, well, 1 day. We can afford to lose 1 day's worth of processing and information. But from a time perspective, we might say, well, we can be done for 5 days before it starts to really become a problem, but maybe we're dealing with payroll data, so we have to be online between this date and this date, otherwise people don't get paid and they go on strike. So one then might say, well, from a recovery time objective, it's 2 days except during month end from this date to this date, in which case it's 0 days. So you would then have those definitions there. And that then starts to play a role when you start saying, okay, well, how do we back up our data? Do we need a hot system here and a hot system here, and we have a live replication being replicated every second? And we have copies of all the transaction files which go off-site, so we can never lose any data? Or do we do this thing once a day or once every 2 days? Or do we have a backup tape? We'll go down to Macro, buy a new PC, and we'll then restore aftermath tapes onto the PC. It'll take us 5 days to do that, but that's okay, because our recovery time objective is 7 days. Okay? So that's where those two measures come into it. And you normally get that kind of info out of your business impact assessments, when you're actually dealing with the business people to say what is it that they require, what is it that they expect. Okay. So hopefully that helps a little bit, so that when we then start to get some questions around that, you can see how those things start to come into it. Okay. But those two definitely aren't directly related to each other. There'll be certain instances where you can't afford to lose any data. There'll be certain instances where you can afford to lose data. And the amount of time you can afford to be down doesn't relate to the amount of data you can afford to lose. Okay. Cool. Okay, so if we come then back to the question that we've got on screen, so this was one of Ishmael's questions. So, which of the following should an IS auditor review to understand project progress in terms of time, budget, and deliverables, for early detection of possible overruns, and for projecting estimates at completion? Okay, so we kind of know that we're now in the project management domain. We're looking at project progress. We're looking at time, budget, and deliverables. And the aim is to try and detect possible overruns and to project estimates at completion. Okay. So if we look at the different answers that we have here, let's look at each of them in turn. Function point analysis. Okay. Does anybody know what a function point analysis is?
Last time when we were here.
So look it up quickly and read it for us. Okay.
So I know that's the answer, but I forgot what.
You think?
I need to go through the content before I know all the answers.
Okay, so while you're looking at that one, the next one, the earned value analysis. Okay. EVA. Okay. If you look at the next one, cost budget. And then the last one is program evaluation and review techniques. So basically, they're giving us a bunch of buzzwords here. So you either have to know what the right answer is, or you have to know which ones can't be right because it means something else. So if we look at all of those, cost budget, you see, it can't be that, because if we know what the budget is and we know how much we spent to date, it's not giving us an indication of how much more effort is still required to complete this thing. So it can't be C, because that really is not going to give us what we need. Okay. And Melissa, have you got FPA?
Okay. Function point analysis technique has evolved over the years to become a multiple point technique widely used for estimating complexity in developing large business applications. The results of the measure of the size of the information system based on the number and complexity of the input-output files, etc. I'm just checking what can actually lead to this project.
Okay, so FPA is a way of estimating the size of a project based on the
Size
functionality.
of the information systems based on the number and complexity of the inputs, outputs, files, interfaces, and queries with which a user sees and interacts. This is an indirect measure of software size and the process by which is developed direct size-oriented measures, such as slot counts, LOC counts.
Okay. So listening to that, it sounds more like something that gets done up front as opposed to being something that you do through the project. Perhaps you could update it. I'm not sure that directly up front it gives us what we're looking for here, but it's certainly something that could give you information towards these estimates that we need. EVA, earned value analysis. You're not finding it. Okay. So if you just Google it, as opposed to trying to look it up in the book, it says earned value analysis, EVA, is an industry standard method of measuring a project's progress at any given point in time, forecasting its completion date and final cost, and analyzing variances in the schedule and budget as the project proceeds. Okay. So that sounds like something that's more directly relevant and useful for what the question is asking us. Because the EVA you do throughout the project. Okay? And you measure the project's progress at any given point in time and forecast completion date and cost of completion. So that would be a method of understanding the project progress in terms of time, budget, and deliverables, and potentially give you early detection of possible overruns. And yeah, so EVA certainly looks like a good option. Okay. And then PRIT, program evaluation and review techniques.
It's a critical path methodology type technique which uses 3 different estimates of each activity duration in view of using a single number for each activity duration. The 3 estimates are then reduced, so it's an like a mathematical kind of a.
So that basically gives you your critical path for a project, which is very useful to know in a project. Okay, but in and of itself, it's not really going to tell you if we're on budget or we're behind budget. It's going to tell us which tasks we monitor more carefully, perhaps, than other tasks because they don't have any slack time in them. So that's not going to give us what we need then to do this. So based on the definition of EVA, EVA seems to be the one which will give us the answer here. Okay? So let's scroll down here and see. Correct answer is B, EVA. Okay, so this is one of those ones where you kind of need to know which each of those things are, otherwise it's not really going to help you. But knowing just a little bit about each one of them will help you. You don't need to know in detail exactly what it means. Okay, so just to recap then, function point analysis was a way of estimating the amount of effort a particular project will take, but it's something that's more than likely done right up front at the beginning of the project. It's not something you keep doing during the project to assess the current state and how much effort is required to complete the project from where you are. The earned value analysis was the one that was more likely to do that, because that was a way of measuring the project progress at any given point in time, forecasting completion date and final cost, and analyzing variances. Okay. Cost budget doesn't help because it just tells us how much we spent to date and what our original budget was. And we won't know using a cost budget until we finish the thing how much we potentially go over. So it's not really good as an early warning system. And then PERT relates back to the critical path analysis, which helps us identify tasks that we need to pay close attention to because they're not going to have any slack time on that critical path. Okay? So if we move on here, and so the answer gives us the definition of EBA. I'll leave it on screen for a second. If you can't find it in the book, you can go and just read it in the video. Okay. Okay, so let's look at the next question. Okay. So the next question is, during the review of an enterprise's prevention maintenance process for systems at a data center, the IS auditor has determined that adequate maintenance is being performed on all critical computing, power, and cooling systems. Okay. Additionally, it is most important for the IS auditor to ensure that the organization, okay, so let's look, there's a whole lot of words in that question. So we're doing a review of an enterprise's preventative maintenance process for systems. Okay. At a data center, so that gives you an idea of the scale and scope of this thing. Okay, we've already determined that there's adequate maintenance on critical computing, power, and cooling systems. Okay, so that's looking, seems to be looking at the hardware side of things. Okay, there's something else that we need to look at. What is that something else that's most important? So that means it's likely that each one of these things will be important in some way or another, and we're going to have to order them and choose the most important one. So option A has performed background checks on all service personnel. Yeah. You need to know that people are stable, they haven't been fired for sabotaging data centers previously or whatever else they might have got up to. So yeah, we don't know yet if it's most important. Escorts service personnel at all times when performing their work. Well, if those are third-party people that you're letting into your data centers, they're not your employees, then ideally, yeah, in theory, you should be escorting them to make sure that they're working in the correct area, they don't actually accidentally fall through a cable or something or do something they shouldn't. So yeah, we should be doing that. C, performs maintenance during non-critical processing times. Yeah, that's also fairly important. You don't want people doing maintenance during critical times, because then the chance of something going wrong and the impact, if something does go wrong, is much, much higher. D, independently verifies that maintenance has been performed. Yeah. If they come along and just tick the box and say, yep, we've checked the aircon filters, we haven't even opened the box to look at them, you might be quite concerned about that. Also depends on your contracts with them, but it's more than just about contracts. You actually want to know that they've done what they say they're going to do. So when you look at that, there's not really any immediate easy ones that you can check out. Okay. But if we go back to the question, to the first few words, during the review of an enterprise's preventative maintenance process. Okay. So that's the scope of what we're looking at, is the preventative maintenance process. Okay. So if we look at that, A, perform background checks on all service personnel. Is that directly related to the preventative maintenance process? I'm not sure what necessarily is. B, escort personnel when they're performing their work. Well, that's related to maintenance in general, but more than just preventative maintenance, it relates to all maintenance, where you've got external parties coming inside. C, performs maintenance during non-critical processing times. Yeah, for preventive maintenance, yes, absolutely, that's the right time to do it. D, independently verifies the maintenance has been performed. Well, you want to do that. So if you look at all of those, C is probably one, but I'm seeing lots of Blank faces here.
I think
You'd go with D. D.
Be more detailed.
Independently verifies that maintenance is being performed.
That's not detect. Not prevent.
Well,
Detect.
It's also preventative in a way, in the sense that you're checking that the maintenance is done before it fails, and then you find out that it hasn't been done.
But if you verify something that has been.
So you
That's
ver-
still preventive.
it's preventative in the sense that you're not going to wait until, let's say, the aircon fails before you decide that they haven't actually done the maintenance properly on it. Okay.
that's like C.
So I've got some C's, I've got some D's. Any other votes here? Okay, let's have a look and see what the official answer says. Correct answer is C. Okay, and they're saying the biggest risk to normal operations in a data center would be if an incident or mishap were to happen during critical peak processing times. So you're almost looking for trouble if you're doing optional preventative maintenance during high-risk critical times. So that would be the highest risk item.
Yes? Oh.
But at least they have hot meals and they're well fed. And the CEO is looking after their staff and keeping their hot meals and keeping them well fed. Okay. So there we have it. Everybody comfortable with that answer? Because the other ones are all things that, yes, you should be doing. But C is the one that you just would be looking for trouble. Yeah. It's the most. There we go. Here's another one. The best. Okay. So which of the following would best maintain the integrity of a firewall log? Okay. So it's best and it's maintain integrity, not of the firewall itself, but of the log. Okay. So A, granting access to log information only to administrators.
That's not too bad.
It's not bad, but it's not really good enough. Okay. B, capturing log events in the operating system layer. Yeah, it just means that if you're running a firewall, you're running it, let's say, on Linux or on Windows, then the OS is actually writing the log files to disk for you. So it's like, I don't think that's actually here or there. Whether the firewall does it or the OS does it, I'm not sure that it helps us a whole lot. C, writing dual logs onto separate storage media. Yeah, that would help. Now you've got two copies of the log files. Okay. Onto different media, so if one crashed, whatever. But you know, here they're not asking about a backup of it, they're asking about integrity of it, which means people can't fiddle with it and we know that it's right. So two copies, we wouldn't necessarily know which copy is the correct one if there were discrepancies. Okay. D, sending log information to a dedicated third-party log server. Bingo. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we look at D, we've got a firewall sitting over here, and we've got a separate logging server over there, which should be managed and administered by somebody completely separate and independent. So if the firewall got compromised, the logging server wouldn't be compromised, and you would have your logs stored over there. And it's fairly common practice in enterprises to have a logging server where you send logs from your Unix boxes or your Windows boxes, wherever, to the logging server. So then you collect them all in one place, you can analyze it, do the big data analysis on it, and then set up your proactive triggers and alerts and monitoring and stuff. So I would definitely go with D. Okay. Okay, the correct answer is D. This says establishing a dedicated third-party log server and logging events in it is the best procedure for maintaining integrity of a firewall log. When access control to the log server is adequately maintained, the risk of unauthorized log modification will be mitigated, therefore improving the integrity of log information. Okay. Yeah, it's partly true. Look, I mean, if an administrator is troubleshooting and they're trying to fix a problem, they might need access to log files. But you certainly wouldn't want them to have right access to log files or to change a log file. Nobody should be able to change a log file or delete it. Okay. So if we go on to the next one now. Okay. Which of the following groups is the best source of information for determining the criticality of application systems as part of a business impact assessment or business impact analysis? Okay. So which of the following groups or people are the best source of information for determining criticality of application systems? Okay. A, business process owners. B, IT management. C, senior business management. Or D, industry experts. Okay, I'm hearing some A's. Okay, why are you saying A? Let's hear some reasoning behind the answer. So I'm hearing lots of silence and one A. Nobody else is C. Okay, so let's hear explanation.
I would think that the business process owner kind of know, like in an application, how the application works, which data is critical or like parts of the process is more critical. So that's how I think of it. Compared IT management is out because they're not even part of business. Senior business management may not necessarily know how the application systems work.
Okay.
Industry experts, what if it's a customized application?
Yeah. Okay. So I like your thinking. Now let's hear from one of those two gentlemen.
Now, you said counter argument to what you say. How would one business owner know how critical his system is compared to another system? Wouldn't they all say my system is critical?
But they
So would it be senior business management that would tell them which one is more critical than the That's all right.
But aren't we doing like a business impact analysis? So we're saying if you had to rate, for example, in terms of say maybe we're looking at a payroll application and you're looking at data, for example. Like we're talking about RTOs and RPOs, so now we're talking in terms of how long, well, how much data or what point we want to recover the data. Who would be the best person in that list to tell us?
What I'm looking at is I'm looking at the question. First of all, I'm not arguing with the logic, but saying which one of the following groups is the best source of information for determining criticality. So I'm saying that A wouldn't be right because if that is your source of information, that person would regard their own system as very critical. As a whole, yes, fine. That's why I'm saying as a whole, it would be better to ask senior management. So they can tell you, listen, my payroll system is more important than my financial system.
But look at the question. Going back to what you're saying there, okay? They're not asking you to rank the criticality and put them in order to say which is more important than which. Okay? They're asking you to do a business impact assessment, which is to answer a whole lot of questions around a particular system, and you do it for each system individually and rank them and do the assessments individually.
So you want to determine, you're not asking them.
I'm not asking them to say, is finance more important than operations? Is operations more important than payroll? We're not asking that.
It's more like source of information.
But the question is misleading.
I don't think the question is misleading. Okay, because if you've ever done a business impact assessment, you'll understand what it's trying to do.
Even with kind of rating business impact, we have to rate why you think that is critical.
Business owners are the people that will understand the systems better because they actually own the system.
And look, you do potentially want some kind of moderation. You don't want everybody to say, well, my system is critical, now everything's rated as 10-10, maximum we're going to spend all the money and we can't afford to have that. So when it comes to moderation, we may want some input from senior management or from some others. But the business process owners are the ones who should understand how long can the business afford to be down without this particular business process? What's the impact of this particular element going down in the business process, and how does that impact the broader business?
And what the system does.
So yeah, so let's have a look, see what the answer is, but hopefully it is A.
I was thinking that senior management is better placed in making such decisions. They know what's critical, you know. They are more knowledgeable about the system.
They may well be.
Once the business,
they are the like strategic thinkers,
but
they steer.
can I ask, can business process owners be not senior business management at the same time?
They could be. They're generally more middle management type people, but they could be senior people.
But who said business owners are not senior management themselves? It's just that they're owners.
From the state,
That's what I was thinking.
the BCP, where does the BCP sit? In A or C?
In BCP, I would say A still.
Not C.
But what do you mean by where does it sit?
Who's
responsible?
responsible? Who do you
For the
talk to
overall.
when something happens?
The business as a whole, basically. Yeah, the forms.
Isn't the BIA
IT.
part of the BCP?
Yes, it
It is.
is. BCP.
So if you, yeah.
The BIA contributes.
What?
Yeah.
It's sub. Whatever.
Because what I'm saying, the senior management might, when they draw the BCP, they might be writing there when the business collapses and then we move to that side or when whatever
They
happens.
need other people as well. They cannot just sit and just
That's fair,
but
but
basically on themselves.
Yeah, I think because it's a collaborative.
It is a collaborative
It's
thing.
not just
And
the
it's
senior
not,
management.
it's
that
not
just
one
sits
person who goes
and-
away and writes a BCP. You know, you
It
have,
involves all departments as well.
it has to. And you might have a BCP
Stakeholders.
champion who's got to drive this thing and then go and facilitate with all these different groups of people and, you know, extract certain information out, write certain stuff, and then you've got to go and test it and do all sorts of things. It's a long and complicated process. Okay, but we're kind of going down a little bit, digressing from the matter at hand here. Okay, so can I
Okay,
scroll to the
I'm
answer?
going for A.
Still going for A.
Still go rooting for A.
You still going for C down there?
No, I changed it.
Let's hope we didn't mislead you down the garden path. And the correct answer is A. But let's read what they say here. So business process owners have the most relevant information to contribute because the business impact analysis is designed to evaluate criticality and recovery timelines based on business needs. Okay? And then for C, they say while senior management must be involved, they may not be fully aware of the criticality of applications that need to be protected. So when it comes down to those lower levels of, you know, which application performs exactly which function within which business process, if we've got this piece of middleware which makes all these things work, senior management may not even be aware that it's there. They might just see this thing running. Those process owners should have that next level of understanding and the depth of understanding. Okay.
You lost now.
Okay. So, next question. Information for detecting unauthorized input from a user workstation would be best provided by the... Okay, so we're looking to detect unauthorized input from a user workstation. Okay. So, A, console log printout.
I know I said log. I know I said console.
Does anybody know what a console log printout is? Your laptop's not the console. You normally would come across that wording in a Unix type environment,
Yes, I've seen it, but
where you telnet or SSH into the console and then you get a console log, or you directly at the console, which is a certain port on the physical hardware, where you've got a keyboard or something, monitor plugged in at the actual console itself, and then you would have a log of everything that happens there. So is that going to tell us much about detecting input from an unauthorized user workstation?
it
Probably
wouldn't
not.
tell me who ran that. No.
Okay. B,
So I will look into something of like on the child in the ledger.
Well, it's not really saying, it's just saying which we want information for detecting unauthorized input from a user workstation. Do I need to zoom this thing in a bit so you can read it better? Can you read okay from there? No, okay, let me make this a bit bigger so that we can. Okay. Yep, you can see there. Okay. So B gives us a transaction journal. So what's a transaction journal?
It's a journal with all transactions.
English.
Could be.
It's a record of all transactions that have happened. Okay. Whether it tells us whether it's coming from a particular user workstation or not, we don't really know. It may be more focused on the business transaction values rather than the whodunit side kind of things. Okay. C, automated suspense file listing.
Automated use suspense file listing.
Suspense file.
Transaction journal. So in this context, a journal is normally a file, and it's keeping a list of all your transactions. They're not really telling us much detail about, what's stored in that journal. So is it just the financial information, or is it the financial information along with some detail of who actually carried out that transaction and which IP address it came from and what time it was and all of that?
Suspense file.
So a suspense account and a suspense file, a suspense account is normally somewhere where you put unmatched transactions that somebody's got to go and look at to go and deal with. Okay. So an automated suspense file listing, I would imagine, is something similar. It could arise out of an interface file or something where, if there's certain transactions that you don't know how to process them or post them, instead of rejecting the entire interface file and then everything goes on hold, you just say these particular ones need further investigation. So you can pop those into a suspense file until such time that they're dealt with. Okay? But that's not really going to tell us about unauthorized input from a user workstation. Okay. D, a user error report. Well, no, I don't think so, because what happens if they didn't make an error?
Yes.
Okay. So it's unauthorized, but they didn't make an error, then it may not end up in the user error report. Sure. So looking at all of those, there's nothing that stands out as being the obvious particular one. So if you're looking for unauthorized input from a user workstation, the transaction journal, I guess it's telling you at least what transactions have happened and potentially where they happened.
I don't know. It's only for the transaction journal.
And then, A, the console log. I'm not. You're thinking it's C, automated suspense file listing?
Because it's like things that people would just throw in on suspense account if they want to hide something.
I suppose that's possible as well.
Because that's what people do to hide fraud.
But there's also valid reasons for having a suspense account. If people put transactions into your bank account and you don't know who they are, you chuck them into a suspense account until you can allocate them to the right places. And it might just sit there until somebody phones you and says, hey, you haven't allocated them out. Okay, so what date, what time, what bank, cool, yeah, okay, we can find them out, allocate it. There's nothing fraudulent about that necessarily.
How channel that would be?
Okay, so we're hearing some for B. We're hearing some for A, B. Okay, let's see what it is. Correct answer is B. Okay. So A is saying a console log printout is not the best because it would not record activity from a specific terminal. Okay. The console log should, by definition almost, be just of the stuff that's happening from the console. Okay. The transaction journal would record all transaction activity, which could then be compared to the authorized source documents to identify any unauthorized inputs. Okay. Kind of makes sense. An automated suspense file listing would list only transaction activity when edit error occurred. So those are the ones that somebody needs to go and fix up, not really telling us about unauthorized. And then D, the user error report would list only input that resulted in an edit error and would not report improper user input. Okay. So, yeah. Again, a number of these are kind of, you talk them through to yourself, you debate each one with yourself, and then you come up with the best answer. And we seem to be doing okay in the last few here. So even though there weren't immediate obvious standout answers like some of the earlier ones, that's got to be it. Okay. There we go. Okay. So an IS auditor observed that multiple applications are hosted on the same server. Okay. Not that uncommon. The recovery time objective for the server will be. Okay, so what did we say the recovery time objective was?
How long after the disaster is occurred, we would like to get back to operations?
Yeah. And it might be a little bit more than like kind of more maybe how much we need to before it starts to cause significant harm to the business.
Oh,
so like might be too gentle a word. But yes, the principle is correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So now taking that into account, and we've got a server where there's multiple applications running on the server. Okay. So if I ask you what's the RTO for application A, you could give me an answer. And application B, you could give me an answer. But if I say what's the RTO for the server, how are you going to get to that answer? Which application's RTO do we use? The longest one.
I think the
We're not looking at answers yet, we're talking.
Depending on the criticality of the system, isn't it?
Okay, so if we've got, so let's say we've got payroll running on there, and we've got, let's say data's running on there, and maybe we've got the infinite server on there, okay? And billing, we need to get billing out daily, otherwise we're not going to get our billing, so that might have a 24-hour period. Payroll might be 72 hours except over month end, in which case it's shorter. And the infinite server, while if it's done for a week, it's not the end of the world. Okay? So we've got 8 hours, we've got 72 hours, and we've got maybe 48 hours. Now we say for the server itself, which one will it be? So we say, okay, shortest. Okay? So let's now look at what they gave us. Based on the application with the longest, no. Based on the application with the shortest, yes. Based on the mean, averaging them out is not going to help anybody, so no. Independent of the RTO and based on the criticality of the applications. Okay. Well,
some of them say it's correct, but it's not addressing the question.
Yeah. So the RTO of the server, base it on the application, the shortest RTO. That makes sense. It gives you a definite number.
But it's not addressing the question.
Okay. So let's see which one we'll say. The correct answer is B. You're doing well tonight. Okay, so when several applications are hosted on a server, the server's RTO must be determined by taking the RTO of the most critical application, which is the shortest RTO. Okay. And then the server RTO cannot be independent of the application RTO, which is what he is saying. So, okay. So next question. Which of the following is the most important when an operating system patch is to be applied to a production environment? Okay. So this could be your Patch Tuesday patches coming from Microsoft. It could be your quarterly patches coming from IBM or HP or somebody like that. Okay. And we want to now apply this in the production environment. So what's most important? A, successful regression testing by the developer. So who's the developer in this case? Microsoft or HP or whatever. Are we going to get them to go and do regression testing and get them to sign off before we can put the patch in? Not going to happen. Okay. So regression testing is more about functionality changes when you're doing application development in your environment. So it's not quite appropriate yet.
But how do we know if it's not our own? We don't need Microsoft to come and test. It's our own developed system.
But you see, if we look at what we're saying here, though, we're applying the operating system patch. We're not applying an application change. If it was an application change that we were applying, then we would be looking for regression testing to be happening. Okay. B, approval from the information asset owner.
Yes.
Yeah. We should be getting approval before we put changes in, and we need the business owners to agree to that. So yeah, we need to do that. C, approval from the security officer. Probably less so, but yeah. No, patches aren't only for security, right? They can be functionality patches as well. And then security wouldn't sign off on them. And security certainly can't override the business owner. So in fact, the business owner gets more of a say than the security officer does. D, patch installation at alternate sites. We may not have alternate sites. So if we look at all of that,
I'll go for B.
B, C,
How would be
D. You can roll them out maybe like piecemeal in case something goes wrong, and then you don't kill everything all at once. Which is not a bad strategy, but in this here, it's not really helping us.
Backup plan.
Look, when you're
If
rolling out,
something goes wrong.
that's installation of
See
alternatives.
how it works. The alternate stuff.
They're not even
Before
saying
you-
it's a test environment.
Yeah,
They're
that's
just
the
saying
problem.
it's an alternate site.
Well, yeah, that could be the other view as well to that, is saying, well, hang on. Now, if we've got a primary site over here and we've got a DR alternate site over there, we can't only patch this environment, we've got to patch both, otherwise they get out of sync. I'm not sure that's what it's saying, but it is a consideration, is that you've got to patch all your sites. You can't just patch some of them.
But if you start with the alternate one before get to the main one.
You could do that. That's again on the assumption that you have an alternate site. So
Yes.
it is a little bit of a wild card.
Yeah.
Testing more intelligence. Let's drop it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go through a quick votes. Again, B, Zubair, B. Are you just going with B because that's what everybody else is saying?
No,
Or?
I initially said A, but then the minute you said, well, I thought A, but the minute you said application.
Okay. Okay, let's look, see what it's saying. Correct answers, B. Okay. So while testing is important for any patch, in this case, it should be assumed that the OS vendor tested the patch before releasing. Before this OS patch is put into production, the organization should do testing to ensure that no issue will occur, which is fine, but it's not regression testing in that nature. B, it's most important that the information owner approves any changes to production to ensure that no serious business disruption takes place as a result of the patch release. Absolutely. C, the security officer does not normally need to approve every patch. D, security patches need to be deployed consistently across the organization, including alternate sites. However, approval from the information asset owner is still the most important consideration. So we're maintaining our record. There we go.
Okay.
Okay. So, recovery time objective. How much time we can afford to be done before we start having serious problems. So a lower recovery time objective results in. Okay, we've got an
It's gonna be expensive.
we've got an immediate answer here. Okay, let's look at the other one, but we can see there's a couple of votes already for B here. So A, higher disaster tolerance. Okay. So if we have a lower RTO, does that give us a higher disaster tolerance? I don't think it does. We don't know what technical solution is being put in place to achieve that. Okay. B, higher cost. Yeah.
Yes.
The lower your RTO, the higher the cost is going to be. C, wider interruption windows. No, it'll in fact give us narrower interruption windows. D, more permissive data loss. No, because we're not talking about the RPO. We don't know what the RPO is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely B.
So then B, higher cost. Okay. Everybody seems quite comfortable with that. We must make sure we don't get caught off guard. The correct answer is B. Okay. B, recovery time objective is based on the acceptable downtime in case of a disruption of operations. The lower the RTO, the higher the cost of recovery strategies. Absolutely. Okay. Okay. Next question. 2 months after a major application implementation, management, who assumed the project went well, requests that an IS auditor perform a review of the completed project. The IS auditor's primary focus should be to... Okay, now, we had a similar question a couple of weeks back.
Yes.
Okay, so let's try and avoid the pitfalls that we experienced last time. Okay, so it's 2 months after the major application implementation. Management assumes the project went well. They ask for a review of the completed project. What's the primary focus of this thing? A, to determine user feedback on the system has been documented. I don't really see that. B, assessed whether the planned cost benefits are being measured, analyzed, and reported. Okay. Okay, we kind of, last time we suggested that that was an option. Okay. C, review controls built into the system to assure that they are operating as designed.
Yes.
Okay. So we're doing a yes over there. D, review subsequent program change requests.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
you
that
would
kind of
review
how
it.
many changes were done, which would give
You
you
can
full
also,
feedback.
Because it's a good indicator of how well or how badly the project ran. If you've got hundreds of changes coming through immediately after implementation, it's an indication that things weren't quite right. But that shouldn't be the primary objective of a test. It may be one of the methods in which you do some testing. Okay. Then assess whether the planned cost benefits are being measured.
Should do that.
Yes.
I mean, it said perform a review of 2 months after major application communication management. I still think reviewing, making sure the controls are on. I think that's more important than checking the cost benefit.
Yes.
I mean, cost benefit might take years.
Okay, now you've just stuck on a key important thing there. Okay.
Yeah.
It's probably too soon to be measuring cost benefit.
But yes.
It is.
If you come through to the life cycle of why we buy or write applications and implement them, okay, it's around delivering business value. And we have to look at cost benefits. And it's extremely important in that cycle. If you're not measuring cost benefits, then you're not looking at your end-to-end process correctly. Okay? However, 2 months after it, when it's your first post-implementation review, it's not the right time to be doing the cost benefits. Okay? It's assess whether the controls built into the system are operating as designed.
Yes.
Okay? Let's have a look and see.
C.
Correct answer is C. Okay. Okay. Everybody happy with that? Okay, so what are we doing here? We're moving an application from test to production. What's the best control that we should have in place? Okay. A, the application programmer copies the source program and compiled object module to the production libraries.
No.
Okay. Principle, we don't want programmers having access to production. If they can copy the source and the compiled code across, then we've got programmers access to production. So we don't want that. Okay. B, application programmer copies the source program to production libraries and then have the production control group compile the program. Sounds better than A though.
But it's still
There's people that can compile the program. on production.
Yeah. Because we also don't know what then has potentially changed in those programs. He might have changed unnecessary programs, copied them across. Next time they compile it, stuff goes through without us knowing about it. There's potential danger to that, but it's definitely still better than A. C, production control group compile the object module to the production libraries using the source program in the test environment.
Yeah, we move into the production.
How do we know it's the correct version? And they're still compiling on production still. No.
So they're using the source code that's sitting in the test environment, and then they're compiling the object module to production libraries. It's probably still one step better than what we had in B, but it's still not quite sitting well. D, production control group copy the source program to the production libraries and then compile the program. That sounds the best of the options so far, because production control are moving the source over and they're compiling it and putting it into production.
Yeah.
And presumably they're having all the correct sign-offs and documentation in place before they do that. Okay.
So are we saying, because it's a production control group that is copying the source program, it is acceptable as opposed to the program?
So the programmer has no say or influence over what's sitting in the production environment from either source or compiled application code, which is definitely the best of all the options that we have there. So correct answer is D. Okay. Yeah, because that way you've got a copy of the source code that you've used, and if you even use the recompiler production, you'll have a copy of the source code used. If you use the source code directly out of test, the next day or the next minute somebody could be changing it, and then you're not going to know what version you've got in production. And if you don't have a copy of the code that's sitting in production, if you need to make any changes, it's not possible.
There's a lot of technical stuff in chapter 4.
Look at it as an opportunity to learn a bit more technical stuff. It's all it says we can't run away from that, unfortunately. Okay. So let's have a look. What's the next question here? Here we go. So for a mission critical application with a low recovery time objective, the IS auditor would recommend the use of which of the following strategies?
Mobile sites? No.
So a mobile site. No. Any yeses for mobile sites?
Going.
No.
Fine. Take it.
B, redundant site.
No. It's a critical.
And so the low recovery time objective.
So we have like a redundant system.
So what's a redundant site?
So like kind of mirrors the environment.
Okay.
Oh, in terms of wait.
I'm just looking at everybody else. Nobody is helping you here. Does nobody know what a redundant site is?
Is that?
Hey, that's good.
Can be. I think. Same something.
Okay.
Mirroring.
No, I think I'm sure it's. I think it's not. No, sorry, it's looking for redundant.
Okay, so let's come back to that one. Let's look at the other options.
Okay.
C, hot site.
Yeah.
So what's a hot site?
This
Site
is
is
going
more
on
expensive.
the main site only, which is go directly to the hot site. Almost immediately it's installed in.
Okay.
Which can be used for critical.
It's not
Okay.
like
So it's
almost like another live
It's
system.
almost like another live.
It's just not being run.
Okay. Hold on to that thought. D, reciprocal agreements. What are reciprocal agreements?
That
With
if
another
we
party
ever
that
go down, when you
we could
assist
use our
us
their
and
staff
you-
and help them.
It's
Is that
a
going to help?
cheaper
Is
option.
that going to help us on this mission critical stuff with really low RTOs? Probably not.
No, it won't.
Okay. So then, so now are we back to B and C? What's the difference between B and C?
What's that?
Okay, hot site facilities 285.
So a hot site is a facility.
With space and basic infrastructure and all of the IT and communications equipment required to support the critical applications, along with office furniture and equipment for use by the staff.
Okay.
They are usually maintain installed, no, sorry, hot sites usually maintain installed versions of the programs required to support critical applications. So the most recent backup copies of data would need to be loaded before critical applications could be resumed. Although hot sites may have a smaller staff assigned, employees are usually transferred to the hot site from the primary site to support operations upon it.
Okay. So Abdulaziz, did you listen to that? So what was different from what you said a hot site was to what that one said?
It's more about the applications being installed. Basically, you can pick up your business directly from the hot site and carry on. Mine was just send the data across.
I think the way he said it was like more like a storage.
Yeah.
area.
The way he said it, the live current data is installed,
Like a mirror.
waiting to be used like a mirror image.
Yeah.
Read what it says in there about the data at a hot site.
Okay, hot sites usually maintain installed versions of the programs required to support critical. The most recent backup copies of data would need to be loaded.
So it doesn't have data installed in it. It's got the applications, no data.
Yeah.
That's a hot site. Okay.
No,
It's got the applications.
So when something happens, then you
Take
need to
your
load,
backup.
yeah, and then load it on.
Okay. So what's a redundant site then? A redundant site is where you've got almost an exact copy of all the equipment, all the data, all the everything.
Oh, yeah.
Next one.
So it is like a mirrored site, yeah.
Yes. So what you describe,
Sites sound nice. They should be spoken.
unfortunately, we don't get to make up and argue for the answer. It's either right or it's wrong. Okay, so when we all look at that then, okay, the most likely one that you're going to need then is actually redundant site. Here. So let's see here. Okay, so a redundant site contains either duplicate mirror facilities that are online at all times or computing facilities of reduced capacity that can process at the acceptable service delivery objective requirement. The data are live, there are no delays waiting for files to be restored. The site is fully operational and able to be processing within seconds or minutes. Okay.
Expensive.
Very expensive.
Oh, it is.
Is more than that. So that gets us to the end of those ones. Okay? So thank you, Ishmael, for doing questions for us. Are these ones that we didn't get on the weekend, or there's still more there?
This is a new set of questions.
Okay.
Three.
We've got some questions left over that we didn't go through of yours on the
That's
weekend.
from chapter 1 to 3.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got those, but Melissa, you still had some
But then it's
questions.
going to be hard to.
Right, let's see if we can get them on here.
Not summer, so you know what to concentrate on when we study. Okay, let me go through it, right?
Is that another class? Training again.
Then I can go.
Really? When we started? When? So someone started today.
Good luck. Good working now. This is still not coming out.
Check this gadget out.
Yeah, but it's a bit temperamental.
Oh, really?
So it's not working for some weird reason. Okay. So I'm gonna kill it here and try and load it up again.
Yeah, also like.
Or email. Please.
Ah, this is good. Maybe. Cool. So let's start. How did it start? Come on. Okay, let's try one more time now. Okay, saying it's working. There we go. Just going to do over there. And print. And just paste it in there. Yeah. Let me just actually see what I'm doing. Yeah, sorry.
I'm lucky the answer so it's there that I can see.
Okay, and this is not copying. Okay. Can you go back to the previous one, please? Stable. Okay. Come up again.
I need to come.
Choosing the one. What might work better is just to photograph the damn thing. Okay, so let's just take pictures of this and email them through. So it's going.
You take 3 pictures and make it 2 just
Yeah, that's a plan. We can then discuss those 3 or 4 and take more of evidence. Is it coming out okay?
I'm just going to email.
Go.
Yeah. I'll take a selfie here.
So,
So, you know that.
Oh, it's locked.
Okay, I'm going to grab some water while this is all going on.
You know it.
Taking something.
Yeah, not like
It's just photos are way too big. I should just send it to you over WhatsApp. Can I have your number? Don't you think that on what you think would be better?
Just email it.
Big.
If you WhatsApp it, I'll put it up
yeah.
on screen.
You make it fine.
I thought you have those gadgets already. I'm gonna say smaller.
Yeah. As long as it's legible enough on screen, that's fine.
Can I have your email?
Send it to my Gmail account. It's probably easy. Actually, doesn't really matter. Just J Williams at ITSec.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Excuse myself.
Honesty is good.
Yeah.
Yep, the one comes through. Just grab that chat again.
I did 5 days, so it's easier now.
So what I do now is questions every time. One of the time questions. So I choose otherwise,
Too many questions.
Okay, that's fine. Let's maybe start with these ones. Yeah.
non-group is got five. I'll send you a screenshot.
Is it working?
It's coming through. I must just the text. The orientation is not right. It's okay.
Maybe I just took it wrong.
It's okay. Well,
Hey, sorry. It's honest. It's like as usual that I'm doing things.
okay, this is good. Okay, let's just pop that up there. That's fine. So should we start with these two here, and then we'll get on to the third one in a second? Okay. So what's this question here? After installing a network, an organization installed a vulnerability assessment tool or security scanner to identify possible weaknesses. Okay. So what's a vulnerability assessment tool? What's a security scanner? And they're talking about a network, so they're probably talking about a network level scanner. Okay. So that could be something like Nessus or McAfee vulnerability scanner, something like that. So it's a tool that you can run on the network, and the tool's going to try and identify vulnerable components or services on the network so that you can try and deal with those. Okay. Then it says, what is the most serious risk associated with such a tool? Okay. So the first thing is differential reporting. What is differential reporting? Right, that's not differential reporting. Okay, in tools like this, you're going to run the tool on a regular basis, be it weekly or monthly and whatever it is. Okay? So you run it the first time, you get a full report of everything that's happened in the network. The second time you run it, you're interested in what's changed between last time and now. So that's differential reporting. It makes your life a lot easier, otherwise you're constantly having to see, well, do we know about this? Have we already got a call logged for it? What's going on? Is it fixed, not fixed? Much easier if we can see only the stuff that's changed. So it's just from a convenience point of view and a scalability of your services point of view. Okay. So B, false positive reporting. So what's a false positive?
Like it's telling us that there is a problem.
Yeah.
When there isn't a problem. When there is not a problem.
Okay. So that then causes us to go and look at something to try and solve some problem that doesn't exist. Okay. If it happens in small numbers, it's okay. If it happens in big numbers, it's a problem because you're running around chasing your tail and most of what you're trying to fix doesn't exist. Okay. C, false negative. Tells us there's no problem. Yeah.
There's no problem.
When there in fact is a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So that means we don't run around and chase anything because we don't know anything about it. Okay. But there is this now hidden vulnerability that we haven't found. Okay. D, less detailed reporting. That sounds more like a configuration setting to say choose the level of detail. Okay. So which of those is the most serious risk? Is it false positive or false negative?
False negative.
False negative, yeah. Because no amount of manpower can solve that problem. And we think we're okay when we're not. Okay. And yep, false negative reporting on weaknesses means the weaknesses in the network are not identified and therefore may not be addressed, leaving the network vulnerable to attack. Okay, and then it goes on to discuss the other ones. Cool? Happy? Okay.
It's like you have to go through each definition. You thought it wasn't there because it's coming from the old history. You thought you would have an easy way out.
What's that?
False negative, false positive.
Sometimes just have to
But now this one, yeah, we'll
get
get you.
the definition in your head.
Okay. Okay. So the next one is one of your networking questions. Which of the following controls will most effectively detect the presence of bursts of errors in network transmissions? Okay. So first one is Parity Check. So what is a Parity Check?
Data transfers in a computer system are expected to be made in a relatively error-free environment.
Yeah.
However, when programs or vital data are transmitted, additional controls are needed.
Yeah.
Transmission errors are controlled primarily by error detecting or correcting codes.
Okay, but what is a parity check in particular? Okay, so it's a single bit, yeah. And what is its purpose?
In transmission.
Is it just in transmission?
Detecting a transmission error which may be missed when either of those checks is used alone.
Okay. So is that what it says about a parity bit?
The parity check, that's what it says.
Because the parity bit is an extra bit that gets used to see if some data is perhaps changed in some way when it shouldn't be. Okay? And it doesn't only have to be used in transmission, it can be used in transmission. It can also be used in the memory inside your computer. Okay? If you buy server type RAM, then there's parity bits or check bits that are used also to determine whether memory is now faulty and giving you wrong results, because that could also be disastrous. Okay? An echo check, what's an echo check? What does an echo check sound like?
Echo.
So you send it to me, I send it back to you, and by me, you sending it to me and I send it back to you, you confirm that yes, that's the correct thing. Because if it doesn't match what you sent me, then there's a problem. Okay. A block sum check. So you've got a block of data, you're calculating some kind of sum, and yeah. Okay. A cyclic redundancy check, CRC. What's CRC? You have the book in front of you there, it's there.
Cyclic redundancy.
A cyclic redundancy check, CRC check, yeah. No, but it's back when you had old analog modems. You used to see CRC checks coming up a lot. Okay. And what's a fax machine? A fax machine just contains an analog modem. So you can get CRC errors in a fax machine, I think. Okay. Okay.
Okay. I can see what it stands for.
Okay, so read it.
No, I can see what the abbreviation of CRC.
But we've been given that.
Okay, so the CRC or cyclic redundancy check is an error detecting code commonly used in digital networks and storage devices to detect accidental changes to raw data. Blocks of data entering these systems get a short check value attached based on the remainder of a polynomial division of their contents. Okay. So it's more than just a bit. So a parity check is one bit. The CRC check is a more robust check. Okay. So in a parity check, if one bit got changed, your parity value would go out. If two bits got changed, your parity check could potentially still be the same value. So a parity check is not a great way of detecting errors, and it will detect an error in one byte of information potentially. The CRC check is about a block of information. Okay. So which of the following controls will most effectively detect the presence of bursts of errors in network transmissions? It would be D, I think, the cyclic redundancy check, because that's what it's designed for. Okay. So the CRC check can check for a block of transmitted data. The workstation generates the CRC and transmits it with the data. The receiving workstation computes a CRC, compares it, and if there's a problem, then it'll highlight it. Okay. Parity check, known as vertical redundancy check, also involves adding a bit to each character during transmission. Okay, and yeah, so you can read what's there. But when it comes to blocks of information being sent over network transmissions, then the CRC check is the one that you would use. Okay. So let me. Let's just see. Okay. Here's the next one. Okay. So, vendors have released patches fixing security flaws in their software. Which of the following should an IS auditor recommend in this situation? Okay. So again, could be a Microsoft, could be an SAP, could be whoever, but a vendor's now released some patches fixing security flaws. So they're not functionality patches, they're specifically security patches. So what's the recommendation? A, assess the impact of patches prior to installation. Could be. B, ask the vendor for a new software version with all the fixes included. Not very realistic because you'd have to install a whole new version. C, install the security patch immediately. Well, D, decline to deal with the vendor in the future. That's a little unrealistic. Everybody has security issues. Okay. So the most reasonable looking one is A, assess the impact of patches prior to installation. Okay. And the answer there is the effectively installing the patch should be immediately evaluated and installation occur based on the results of the evaluation. So I think that's a fair answer there. Okay, so let's get this here. Let's just try the next one. Yeah, let's see if we can. Okay, so let's see if we can read this. In a small organization, an employee performs computer operations and when the situation demands, program modifications. Okay, so the person is normally a computer operator and occasionally they make program modifications. Which of the following should the IS auditor recommend? A, automated logging of changes to development libraries. B, additional staff to provide separation of duties. D, procedures that verify that only approved program changes are implemented. Or D, access controls to prevent the operator from making program modifications. Okay. So they're telling us it's a small organization. So you get these kind of situations that arise. Okay, so A, automated logging of changes to development libraries. Yeah, you would want to see that. B, additional staff to provide separation of duties. Not realistic. C, procedures that verify only approved program changes are implemented. Yeah, you would want that. D, access controls to prevent the operator from making program modifications. What says he has to do it from time to time anyway, and he's the operator, so he could probably override that anyway. So C, procedures that verify that only approved program changes are implemented seems reasonable. So it says, of the choices, C is the only practical one that has an impact.
Why you did that? You did like this. I'm wondering, what is this?
Because unlike most of the answers where they tell you the right answer first, this one starts explaining some of the wrong ones. Okay, so the answer is C.
Oh. It is C.
Okay, so. Okay, what's that?
This one is one that was called.
Okay. It zoomed it too much. Okay, there we go. Okay, so which of the following types of firewalls provides the greatest degree and granularity of control? Okay. So let's look at them. A, screening router. B, packet filter. C, application gateway. D, circuit gateway.
Are we gonna get questions like this?
Yeah, you could. Okay, you could. And this comes down pure to definitions. You've got to know what each one of those things are, otherwise you can't answer the question. Okay, so A is screening router. So routers are a basic form of firewall. They can perform firewall-like functions, but they're not advanced firewalls by any means. Okay, B, a packet filter. Again, you can put basic packet filtering rules into it. You get packet filtering firewalls built into certain operating systems, but it's a very basic level of firewall. C, application gateway. Yeah, that can be quite advanced. It actually understands the protocols that are coming through, and it rewrites every request and only allows valid application type requests to come through. D, circuit gateway. That's a more lower level network type thing. So of those, C, application gateway looks the most likely. The other ones are fairly basic. Okay. Yeah.
I'm gonna leave. You go for prayer and leave someone afterwards.
Okay. Sure. Okay. So these ones are difficult to answer if you don't have a basic understanding of what these things are. You know, and it's even hard to kind of guess them, because if you really don't understand what each one of them are or have a clue what it is, it's purely a guess then. So yeah, we can maybe, when we look at the different layers of the OSI model, perhaps look at some of these at the same time. But you're going to have to at least write down some of them and learn what some of these things are.
Right.
And again, doing more and more questions, these things will come up again and again, and then hopefully it helps you remember some of them, and then you can deal with the questions. And the practice and learning is really the only way you can get around it, unfortunately. I've lost my mouse. Where's my mouse? Okay, so let's close that one. So which one is that? Okay, so that's that one. Okay, then there was another email that you sent. Let's just find it there. Okay, so this one's got 2 questions. So let's do these 2 questions. Please. So is this the one? Okay. Okay. So let's just see here. So what are we looking at here? Databases. An ICE auditor analyzing the audit log of a database management system, DBMS, finds that some transactions were partially executed as a result of an error and not rolled back. Okay. Which of the following transaction processing features has been violated? Okay. So how do we normally want transactions in the database to work? Okay. So let's give an example. Let's say we're posting a general ledger transaction. So we've got, let's say, debit bank credit expenses. Oh no, it wouldn't be expensive, it would be credit income, wouldn't it? We're getting tired. Okay. So now we've got our application, and it's now going to write these 2 entries into the database. Okay. So if it posts the debit side, and then some kind of error happens, and then it doesn't get to post the credit side, what's going to happen? We're going to end up with a one-sided journal, which violates the most basic principles of accounting. So, yeah. So what happens in the database is that you have a begin, an end, and then a commit. So you'd say, okay, begin. Now I'm going to have a multi-part transaction happening. So this is the first part, this is the second one, however many you've got. And then you would end that. So, okay, cool, that's the whole thing. And then you would say commit. And then the database knows that it must write all of those things into the database. And if it doesn't write all of those things into the database, it must roll them all back. So it treats all of them as if they won. Okay? So what they're saying here is that some transactions were partially executed as a result of an error. So it sounds like they haven't put that start and that stop and that commit. So that's a problem. Okay? So now, which of those things, which of those terms applies now to what we're talking about? Okay, so it's not durability. So
It's not isolation. I think it's not isolation.
So isolation stops one thing from interfering with something else. It
Yes,
puts,
isolated.
yeah, okay, so it's not that.
And
Consistency, we're talking database many consistency.
Yeah, so-
I don't know what consistency is right there.
it's a set, acid thing.
The bottom one.
That's an acid, A for atomicity and D for
Oh,
durability,
yes,
isolation.
yes,
This
yes.
is how they,
That acid, the way it's put in the book.
yeah. it's
That acid, the
Yes, that's what they're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Consistency, isolation, and then durability.
Okay, so you've definitely read this thing.
I tried.
Okay.
Atomicity, it's when it's either the whole thing is posted or
Yes.
it's not at all.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
it can't post one leg and leave the
That's
other
it.
leg. So if it's
So based on that, then the answer is
D.
D.
D. See, you've learned this, you know this. Okay. So it's, yeah, an atom is, you've got your protons, your electrons, all these things, and it makes up this atom, and it must go in as a whole. Okay, you can't break that thing apart. Okay,
Yes.
cool. So,
See, after you say that acid thing, then it comes back to me.
It just made me miss you. That's amazing.
Yes, yes.
smoking acid.
I think people think, no, not acid, it's atomicity.
I don't
Okay.
think we forget now what
You want-
the acid is.
But you need to know which each one of these
Definition,
things are.
yes.
As you're breaking it down.
Within the context of a database or an operating system or a network or where it's happening. Okay.
In case they're not looking.
Okay, so one more question coming up here.
Is it in the morning?
Okay, so what do we got here? Okay, so this one, a company is implementing a dynamic host configuration protocol, DHCP. Okay, we've
The
spoken
guy
about
asked about
DHCP.
it, yeah, and I forgot what it means.
Okay.
So
You just
I
can't.
remember someone asked a question.
Mhm.
Was it DHCL or DHCP?
That was DHCP.
Okay.
Okay, and we said this is what allows your phone to get an IP address and know what the gateway is and all that when you connect. Yeah, so whenever you go into a new network area, your device connects to the network, connects to the DHCP server, and that allocates it an IP address and tells it what it needs to know about operating in that area. It's kind of a nice host that tells you there's the bathroom over there and there's the emergency exit and all that cool stuff. That's your DHCP server. Okay, so now we're implementing a DHCP server. Then it says, given that the following conditions exist, which represents the greatest concerns? Okay, so A, most employees use laptops.
No.
Okay, that's not really a concern. B, a packet filtering firewall is used.
No.
No, not really. C, the IP address space is smaller than the number of PCs. Okay,
No, that's not.
well, let's come back to that one. Don't chuck that one out so quickly. D, access to a network port is not restricted.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Biggest risk
Access. It's a concern.
if it's not restricted.
Okay, so let's look at those then. So most employees use laptops, not a big deal. I mean, whether people use laptops or desktop, who really cares? It means potentially people go out and come in, so there's maybe not stable numbers. And we spoke last time about a DHCP gives you an IP address for a certain time, and that's your
And it
lease
can
period.
restrict you how
And if your lease period,
keep your
Yeah, so if you've got 100 laptops but only 50 addresses and people are out of the office, they might still be holding on to an IP address, so that could cause you a problem. Okay. C, the IP address space is smaller than the number of PCs. That is a problem, because that means certain PCs are not going to be able to get an IP address, and they're not going to be able to connect to the network. Okay. So that means your network is not going to function and deliver its intended purpose. Okay. So that's a risk. Okay. D, access to a network port is not restricted.
I think that's a biggest risk, more than B.
Okay, so in many organizations, access to your network ports are not restricted. There is something called network access control, which then requires that each network port is then limited to a particular PC or whatever, but very few organizations implement that or implement it successfully.
No.
Most organizations, you can take a laptop and you can go and plug it into the wall, and a DHCP server will give you an address. That's fairly normal. As much as you may not want it like that, that's the reality of what it is. So if I was looking at this over here, the biggest risk would be that, to me, that they're buying a product to provide networking access to users, and a certain number of users are not going to be able to use this product. Okay. So I would go with C, but you go with D. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Okay.
Because they don't announce like the other questions.
I think you might be right. Because it says here, given physical access to a port, anyone can connect to the internal network. The other choices do not present the exposures that access to a port does. DHCP provides convenience to the laptop users. Sharing IP addresses and the existence of a firewall can be security measures. Okay, that's interesting.
That's why you're not telling us.
Because that's
You're
how we
supposed to
discuss.
tell me, yes, you write, you
Oh my God, seriously.
Okay.
Okay,
So that's an interesting one. So perhaps from a risk point of view, yes, D is the greatest risk. Now, when you do look at it practically, if you take your AG, okay, at your offices, okay, you take our router over here. There's no access control on the ports. Anybody can go and plug a machine. It's not best practice, and it's not what you would like. But from a cost point of view, from a convenience point of view, it often ends up being that way. So yeah, so maybe that is the greatest risk. I would still be of concern if people weren't able to work because there's not enough address space.
That
And
doesn't
they
explain
can't.
why that one is not the greatest risk or greatest concern.
No, they don't.
Because that would have
It's
direct.
explained better online.
yeah.
Is there any question like that?
Yeah, I did come across it.
Which domain?
Okay. Well, if you come across this
Okay, maybe
question
when I
again,
come
won't you
back.
save it for us
Yeah.
so we can see what the explanation is there? Because what it's doing, which is quite an interesting thing, is that it's giving you one which is an operational concern around availability versus a security concern. So, now if we look at the tenets of information security, confidentiality, integrity, availability. Availability is a security concern. So now we're playing off the two and saying, well, which is more important, availability or confidentiality / integrity? So it's, but yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next week.
Ish, getting closer and closer.
It is, but keep at it. Keep doing the questions. Keep doing your readings.
See you in 2 weeks' time.
Tomorrow we leave.
Okay. So thanks everybody for joining us, and I hope that session was useful to you all. We'll be back online in a week's time, so hopefully we can see you all then. It's a pleasure, Ephraim. Hopefully we'll see you next week. And keep on with the studies, keep on with the questions. And if you have questions, you're welcome to email them through to us, and then we'll cover your questions as well. Cheers, Carmen.